live again.
All right, well, picking up where we left off, talking about therapeutic interventions, there's another one that I wanted to mention, and it's what I refer to it as phototherapy. I found this out from a colleague of mine. Excuse me. A lot of her work is done by clients bringing in photographs from their life. And, excuse me. So I kind of took that idea, and one of the things I did with groups, I had people bring in pictures of themselves as a child around the time that the abuse was taking place. And then I would have them talk to that child. And one client was very negative, like, oh, he's a useless little brat, you know, who cares about him? Which is really how it felt for him to be a child. But another thing I've done, and I've done this with groups, and it's really kind of interesting, I ask clients to bring in a photograph of the family. It can either be a staged photograph with a professional photographer, or a casual snapshot around the dinner table or in front of the Christmas tree or picnic table or whatever. Just bring in a photograph that contains as many family members as possible. And then they do that. In turn, they each share their photograph. They pass it around. We talk about it. Well, who are these people? What is the occasion for them to all come together? What's going on? These two are kind of sitting off by themselves. What's going on with them? Oh, well, they were a year apart, and there was a 5-year gap between them and the older siblings. So they used to hang around together. They didn't have much to do with the older siblings because of that age gap. Okay. Well, who's this other person off to the side? Oh, well, that was aunt or uncle or whomever that lived with the family, and they kind of have a tendency to stay out of the picture. Well, who was taking the photograph? Who's behind the camera? So that's all useful. So you explore what does the photograph reveal about the family dynamics. And then what I would do, I would take all their family pictures and I would photocopy them, and I would give them the photocopy back along with the original and invite them to feel free to cut up and rearrange the family in some way. And that was really interesting because first of all, we talk about the reality and the family dynamic. And then when they cut up and rearrange the family, we talk about things that they wish that they could have changed. Now with I remember this because there was a grandmother that lived with the family, and she was the head of the house. And ironically, she was sitting head and shoulders above everybody else. So when he cut up the photograph, or the photocopy, he brought her down to eye level with everybody else because he wanted to reduce her power in the household. And he had a stepfather that had been part of the family since he was an infant. And as far as he was concerned, this man was his father, even though he wasn't biologically his father. And he was a very nurturing, caring father. So what he did is he brought him in closer because he had, during the original photograph, he had kind of placed himself a little off to the side. So he brought him in closer to acknowledge the fact that he really saw him as, emotionally at any rate, the real father in his life. There were a couple other photographs where there was an offender in the photograph, so they cut them out of the photograph altogether. Life would be so much better if this person had not been part of it. So again, the first photograph, we talk about what's really going on in the family, and then with the photocopy that's rearranged, how would you like to have changed the dynamics if you could? So it's actually quite interesting to use phototherapy with clients. And this person that I heard about this from, you know, pretty much all of her work is working from photographs with people. They just keep bringing in photographs and talking about what's going on at the time that this photograph was taken. How old were you? What was going on? What was happening in your life at that point? So I borrowed that, kind of created my own little version of it, and it's actually been quite useful, especially in groups, because it helps when one client talks about the dynamics in their family and how they wish it would be different. It really helps other people think about their family dynamics and how they would like to change things if they could. And that's just another kind of creative therapy that I found to be quite productive. Another thing I wanted to mention is attachment theory. It's not exactly an intervention as much as it's an awareness. When a child has an unhealthy attachment, then that is something that persists throughout life. They either have unhealthy attachments or they have difficulty attaching to anyone. So when a baby is born, it's really important that they bond right away with the parent. Usually it's the mother. The baby pops out, the baby's placed on her chest before anything else happened. I mean, they cut the cord, the baby's placed on the chest, and then after there's a few minutes of that bonding, they take the baby away, they clean him up, diaper him, whatever they do, and then bring him back to the mother. I think I mentioned that when my nephew was born, they handed him to me. And so he and I bonded really quickly, and we have a really strong attachment. Out of all of our family members, you know, his brother and half-siblings and so on, he's got a couple, and I have one brother left, and I've got some cousins around, but this nephew and I, we are each other's primary family, and I think that initial attachment had a lot to do with it. We understand each other really well, we get along really well, and when we have sort of a little rough moment, we kind of work it out, and it passes, and we're fine. So attachment really is significant. A lot of our clients either had a poor attachment or they had an unhealthy attachment. So if their original attachment was with their offender, then that's a really unhealthy dynamic. And they really don't know how to attach in a more healthy way to people. So it's not a theory that I know a great deal about. I haven't done extensive reading, but I certainly see it manifest in a lot of the clients I work with. I mentioned a client who was the only adopted child in a family of 4 kids. And I think that a big part of his ongoing issues is attachment. He basically feels like he's alone in the world. He has a partner, but it has not been physically intimate for quite a long time. And there's a lot of issues that his partner tends not to want to work out. She seems to, oh, I'm fine, I don't really need to see a therapist. But her fear is that if she goes to a therapist, people will tell her to leave him. So she doesn't want to go to a therapist. And it's really kind of a codependent relationship. It's not a particularly healthy attachment because he was adopted at birth, never allowed to bond with his natural mother. He was left in the hospital for 2 weeks because the holidays were approaching and the family didn't want to be bothered with a new baby. So waited until the holidays were over before they came to the hospital to pick him up. So here he was in the nursery at the hospital for 2 weeks. No attachment whatsoever. And then in his family, his siblings, who were natural children of these parents, kept saying, you're not really one of us, you're not really a member of this family. And so that lack of attachment was reinforced constantly by his siblings. And the father, the adoptive father, didn't really treat him like a child of his own, but treat him like free labor. Here at 10 years old, working with his father using power tools. You know, and this kid would be wandering around the neighborhood and they didn't seem to really mind. They didn't seem to even care or know where he was most of the time. So attachment has been an ongoing issue for him. And he's down to very few friends. There's only a couple people that he counts as really kind of long-term friends. And I've been a constant in his life for 10 years, you know, pretty well every week, at least 2 or 3 times a month. So he certainly trusts me, but I think it's rather unnerving for me to talk about retirement. Because when I go, who's he going to have left? He actually has a friend who goes way back, who lives here in Edmonton, and is a counselor. And I thought maybe she was going to be here today, but she didn't show up, so maybe she didn't get the information, I'm not sure. I emailed him, and thinking that she would show up. But anyway, he doesn't really have a whole lot of friends, and a lot of it just because of that lack of healthy attachment at birth. So that's something that I think is important to be mindful of when you're working with survivors of sexual abuse, especially if it's incest, because it's going to be an unhealthy attachment. Some of this stuff I've talked about, and I'm going to kind of revisit a bit. I'm pretty sure I talked about sexuality abuse. Does that sound familiar? That very often clients say that, well, I wasn't really sexually abused, but they've got a lot of issues around sexuality or intimacy or whatever. And it may be that they grew up in a religious household where sex was just taboo, you know, and you're not even supposed to enjoy it when you have sex with your married partner. You're supposed to just get the job done and, you know, go on to something else. So it's something to be aware of. Gender identity, sexual orientation, I think I was pretty clear about the difference there. Traumatic triggers, they can be all kinds of things, scents, smells, music. Someone can be physically similar. I had, one of our therapists was working with a client and they really seemed to be really stuck. They just weren't getting anywhere. And so the therapist said, well, is there anything about me that might be problematic? He said, I never really thought about it, but you have curly salt and pepper hair just like my offender. And he said, well, that could be it. So I suggest that you work with one of the other therapists in the office for a while and see if that makes a difference. So he did. He shifted to another therapist who had very straight, kind of sandy brown hair. And sure enough, things started moving again. Now, the therapist that he was seeing originally certainly was a safe therapist. There was no boundary crossing or anything. It was just that physical similarity that on a subconscious level prevented the client from really opening up and engaging in some meaningful work with that therapist. So that was a traumatic trigger that was sort of hidden until they really started exploring just the physical similarity. And that can happen with anybody. You know, I'm sure that there are offenders out there in the world that might look a little bit like me with the receding hairline and the lines in the face and that kind of thing. So to think that I'm going to be an actually perfect fit for every client that comes along is probably faulty thinking. There could be a number of reasons why that's not going to be a good connection. Dissociation, I've talked about that. The dissociative mechanism, I think what I was talking about there is that what is the sort of internal or psychological mechanism that results in a person dissociating? And certainly picking up on a traumatic trigger, even on a subconscious level, is going to be one of the mechanisms by which a person ends up being dissociated. The proximity of the trauma is beginning to surface. You can feel it coming up. The feelings are starting to well up. The images are kind of flashing in your head. That becomes a trigger by which you engage your dissociative mechanism. Being in a place that you feel unsafe, it could be a work environment, it could be a crowded public venue or something. These are all places that may be the mechanism that triggers that dissociative response. So sometimes being aware of what these triggers are is really important. Now, it's not exactly a direct step to what I'm going to next, but I think it's significant. When a client falls off the wagon and they go back to using drugs and alcohol or gambling or sex, whatever their addiction is, of course, as therapists, we try to identify what the triggers are. And there's valuable. It's important to know what the triggers are. But what some therapists do is they spend too much time talking about the triggers. And that basically reinforces and puts energy into that trigger. And in a way kind of empowers the trigger. What's more important is asking the clients, why didn't you fall off the wagon? What was the mechanism by which you did not fall off the wagon or backslide? Why didn't you decide to commit suicide? What was the thing that kept you from making that choice? Those are the things that you really want to nurture and encourage. Because one client was feeling suicidal. He said, I don't want to do that to my kids. It's important for them that I be in their life. And I don't want to be that. I don't want to be this suicidal father. So that was the thing that kept him from taking that step. So his love for his kids and the desire to make sure that they have the best possible experience of him was what kept him from committing suicide. The same thing with people that decide not to go back to drugs or alcohol. They think about, I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to lose my partner. I don't want my kids to see me drunk yet again. So those are the things that are more important to emphasize than the triggers that result in people falling off the wagon or backsliding. Again, the triggers that cause the backslide or the falling off the wagon are important to identify. So maybe there's some way to avoid them, but you want to spend more time focusing on the mechanism that keeps people on the track of health and recovery. And that's really an important distinction that I think that needs to be emphasized. Impediments or path to intimacy. I put this together a while back, and I'm not exactly sure what I was thinking, but certainly a lot of the things that we've talked about, the triggers, the dissociative mechanisms, the low self-esteem, the self-blame, the guilt, the gender orientation confusion, those are all impediments to intimacy. And really, the path to intimacy is to address those things and to resolve them. But there's some other things that are coming up as I think about this. I've had clients that have a lot of difficulty around sexual intimacy. It just doesn't work very well for them. And so I say to them, choose a reasonable length of time, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, in which you commit to celibacy. No sex for 3 weeks or a month, whatever feels like a reasonable length of time. But during that sexual sabbatical, then you spend time being intimate in non-sexual ways. You can sit watching TV and you give each other a hand massage or a foot massage or a back rub. Or you snuggle up and you watch TV, but the commitment is to not have sex. So the performance anxiety and all the pressures and triggers and all the baggage that's connected to sex are set aside. And meanwhile, you get comfortable with being intimate with your partner in some non-sexual way. And that begins to build a greater sense of safety and connectedness between the partners. And what happens quite often, during that break in sex that they decide that they're going to take, it doesn't work. They end up slipping up and being intimate after all. But somehow it happens in an easier, less baggage-ridden kind of way. And it really helps people resolve their issues around sexuality. With one couple, they were both survivors, and I had worked with them both a bit. Mostly him, but both of them somewhat. They realized during that time break, that break that they took, that they both were very sexually obsessive, and their sexuality was not a healthy one. And so that really helped them realize that rather than being obsessive about sexuality, they need to take that to a place where it was healthy, it was loving, it was affectionate, it was connectedness. It wasn't just an obsessive acting out. But that break that they took and the difficulty they had with staying celibate for 2 or 3 weeks really helped them realize that they had a lot of problems around sexuality that needed to be resolved. So that's kind of, I guess, some of the things I was thinking about with that idea about impediments or a path to intimacy. So let's see what the next cell says. I'm not sure what we're going to run into, but there it is. Okay, working with specific groups. I did talk about this a bit, but I want to revisit it because I just don't remember what was in the interview that was somewhere else and part of this, this lecture. If you're not a member of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, two-spirited community, then it's important that you learn about that. I think I gave you the example about CBT yesterday. Yeah, I won't repeat that. But two-spirited is a part of First Nations tradition. Two-spirited people were people that were deemed to be in possession of both male and female energy. And very often they were in the role of healers. You know, the men would go off to battle, they'd come home, and these people, the two-spirited people, would treat their injuries. And sometimes if a woman was pregnant or in certain stages of her cycle and was not able to be sexual, then sometimes the two-spirited people would satisfy the sexual needs of the husband. And that was perfectly fine. It was a viable role and a respected role within traditional First Nation communities. So there's a bit of a bridge there between the two-spirited and the First Nations, which is the next one. I've had the privilege of working with a lot of First Nations people over the years. And I think as Canadians, it's important that we understand the impact of the residential schools. And you don't have to embrace native healing practices as part of what you do, but some therapists do choose to do that. I know some Caucasian therapists that smudge their office because they get the concept. They understand what that's all about. I've gone to a sweat lodge, mainly to kind of find out what it was all about. I've been to a few other things. And working with First Nations, I really understand a lot about their spirituality. And the thing I really like about Native spirituality is that their idea is that spirit of the Creator is in all things, is in the earth and is the animals and the plants and people. And before they go hunting, they pray to the spirit of the animal that they're hunting. And they said, please forgive me for hunting you, but I need to feed my family. I mean, that's paraphrasing the kind of nature of their praying to the spirit of the animal that they're going to be hunting. And that really, to me, is a sign of respect. A lot of people, non-native people, really feel like the earth is here for us to exploit. But it isn't. We're supposed to be caretakers of the earth and all the living forms on it. And yes, we have to eat to survive. So if we are aware that Everything that lives on this planet has a right to live and to exist. And if we have to, pull up those carrots or kill that animal in order to feed ourselves, we have to do that with respect and understand that they have a much right to live. And we are feeding bacteria all the time. We are feeding viruses all the time. I'm getting tired. Microorganisms are feeding off of us all the time as well. So we're all in this together. All life forms are in this together. And I think if you have that kind of universal unity kind of attitude that's so much a part of native spirituality, to me it seems like a better way of living. To me, God is not some mythical guy in flowing beards living up in the clouds somewhere. He's all around us. He, she, it, whatever God is all around us in every single life form. In every rock and every stone and every drop of water, there is the essence of the creation. And so I think if we treat life with that kind of respect, and I have this statement that I make. I believe in heaven and hell. This planet is heaven. Hell is not realizing it. I want that to sink in, because if we don't treat this planet with the dignity and the respect it needs, then we create a living hell. And that's what's happening. The pollution, the exploitation. This planet is not being treated with respect by the predominant species. But if we recognize this incredible paradise that we're gifted to be living on, we would have a much cleaner environment, a much happier species, and a better relationship to everything, to all life around us. So anyway, that was a little bit of a digression, but that's part of my philosophy, is that I think that we really have to recognize the incredible place where we live. New Canadians, I don't know to what extent that's an issue around here, but we get a lot of immigrants in Vancouver, a lot of Asian population, but we have Iranians, East Indian, and they tend to live in certain parts of the city. A lot of Iranians live in North Vancouver, the North Shore. Chinese people live in Richmond. In fact, they have Chinese street signs in Richmond with both English and Chinese writing on them. And then East Indian people live kind of in my area, South Vancouver, and also out in the Fraser Valley in the farm areas. So they kind of stick to themselves. But therapeutically, you have to be aware and mindful of their traditions and how best to approach them, and approach them on their level. Rather than expecting them to suddenly become a white person, you need to try to tap into their sensibilities and their belief systems. So I don't know if there's a cell after this, but let's see. No, there isn't. So I just want to talk about self-care. And then if we can go back to revisit any part of this 2-day lecture that people still want to talk more about. But self-care is really important. There's two things. There's burnout and compassion fatigue. And they're different. Burnout is really more of a physical condition where I've just worked too many hours. It takes up so much energy that I'm just getting physically exhausted. I have a tendency to get sick more often. So I need to really slow down and take care of my physical well-being. Whereas compassion fatigue is that you've heard these stories, and because you're empathetic and you care, you just feel like you're emotionally drained. You might be fine physically, but emotionally you just feel completely emotionally wiped out. So that's compassion fatigue. So you need to monitor your work hours. I do work 6 days a week quite often, but the 6th day is maybe 2 or 3 hours. And if I feel like I've done enough work for the day, I leave. I don't have to stay there till 6 o'clock. If I feel at 4:30, I think I've accomplished enough today, I think I'm just going to head for home. I'm going to do that because it's about taking care of myself. Part of self-care is supervision, which I've talked about. The important to have some kind of support network where you can debrief the work you're doing. That's really important. I talked about diet, which is really important, self-care, that you're aware of your nutritional needs, the way your body works. We're talking earlier with someone that's ADHD and how that works, and that's an issue that you have to deal with. If you're diabetic, that's something you have to deal with. If you have high blood pressure, or if you have some kind of genetic condition, all those factors have to be taken into consideration. So you can make the best of whatever you've got. You can take two identical twins. One person doesn't take care of themselves, they eat a lot of junk food, and they sit around not being active, and they are not healthy. Whereas you got the other twin that eats right, gets the right amount of exercise, doesn't overdo it, but gets the right amount of exercise, has good sleep etiquette, has a good attitude about themselves and about their relationship to the life around them. And they're doing well. They look good, they're fit, they're healthy, they don't get sick. Same genetic material. One person's taking care of it, the other person isn't. So clients have a tendency survivors, well, some clients of anything, but survivors in particularly very often don't really take good care of themselves. And so if you have to set an example of good self-care, so some of my clients know that I put in a lot of hours, but I'll say, but I take care of myself. I eat right. I get a good night's sleep. I may not sleep as many hours as some people, but I have a good solid sleep. Well, last night it didn't happen, but anyway, typically I sleep well. And I talk a lot about diet and that I don't go to a gym and work out, but I'm active enough. I do a lot of walking, and when I walk really fast. I don't saunter, I just motor on down the sidewalk because I like to just get where I'm going. I do try to exercise a bit, but nothing really formal. I would rather do an activity that's good. Like I would rather go for a bike ride than sit on a stationary bicycle. I would rather be throwing bales of hay up onto the truck than in the gym pumping iron. I'd rather be out chopping wood than lifting iron. So to me, an active lifestyle where the business of your life involves some physical activity, I think is better than sitting in some gym just going, you know, I mean, I'm not saying that that's bad, but personally I would rather be out in the world doing something, that the activity itself is productive, aside from what it does to keep my body happy and fit. I used to live out in the country, and I loved going out and chopping wood and working in the garden and things like that. It felt good. I mean, I love working in my garden. I've got a small garden plot. Even though I live in an apartment block, I've got garden plots that I go out. And in the summertime, most of my dinner comes out of my garden, and that feels really nice. It's not only physically good to go out and working in the garden, but spiritually it's good to go out and go out and bring your dinner in out of your garden and sit down. And it can't get any fresher. You're a gardener, you know about that. Yeah, it's a great joy, gardening. And you don't have to have a whole lot of room. Pardon me? Literally the fruits of your labor, yeah. I had bees for a while. So I had my own honeybees for a while, so I would pick berries out of my garden. Mind you, I bought the little tart shells because I've never been able to make pie crust, but I would take berries from my garden and I would sweeten it with honey, and I would use a little bit of tapioca powder for thickening, and I'd make these wonderful fresh berry tarts that, you know. Delicious. Yeah. And well, I cheated a little bit. I put a few chocolate chips in amongst the berries. It was kind of a nice touch. And I think it's hard for people that are compassionate and caring to say no. And that was part of, I used to see 6 clients a day, an hour and a half each, 9 hours of therapy with no breaks in between. And then clients would be contacting me saying, well, I work until 7, can I see you at 7:30? And I'm thinking, oh, this person really needs to be seen. They're a survivor. They're dealing with their issues. They don't have support. Sure, come on in at 7 o'clock, and I don't mind staying until 9 o'clock at night. No, I had to stop doing that because I'm not going to be able to be the best therapist I can be if I'm mentally, emotionally, or physically exhausted. So I had to set limits. But that's also a good message to your clients. I would love to see you, but I can't see you after 6 o'clock because I need to take care of me. Because if I don't take care of me, I'm not going to be in a good enough state of being to take care of you. So if you can arrange to come and we negotiate a time that fits within the hours that I have committed to my work, and we can find something, but that modeling is really important to you and to your clients. So self-care is as much a therapeutic tool for your clients as it is for you staying fit and able to do the work you do. So I think that's something to be very conscious about. And it's fine to share with your clients. Like, to keep myself healthy, I pay attention to my diet. I try to get a reasonable amount of exercise. And if I'm having problems sleeping, I try to figure it out and resolve that because I want to be at my best. so that I can be at my best for you. And so, again, it's good modeling as well as it's instructive. So, I just want to kind of reflect for a minute now, but if there's any questions about anything or anything that you'd like to mention or any input or anything that comes up for you, let's talk about it.
Well, you mentioned about self-care. You can go more on that because quite commonly a lot of people don't do self-care.
Right.
Especially men.
Right. Well, first of all, there's the idea that you have the right and in a way the responsibility to take care of yourself. Sometimes that's the starting point because people don't get it. But a lot of it is that people don't know how to take care of themselves. If they grew up in a household that parents were not terribly attentive and you know, they didn't really worry so much about nutritional balance, like, I don't feel like cooking, there's, you know, go have some cereal. That's not dinner. That's not a balanced diet. But if people grow up with that kind of thing, they don't know how to take care of themselves. If you have parents that never do anything, they never move around, let's say your parents on welfare and they do nothing but sit around all day and drink beer and watch television, where are you going to learn about self-care? But if you have parents that are fit, they exercise, they go for runs, they go for bike rides, they go for a nice vigorous hike on the weekends, then you learn from them. But a lot of our clients have never learned how to take care of themselves. So really instilling the importance of self-care, you've got to get that idea across to them. But then how do they do that? They don't know how to do that. So you can instruct them in as much as I've already explained. You're talking about diet and that kind of thing. And that running on hard pavement, for example, can cause shin splints and so on. And you're also hyperventilating car exhaust if you're running alongside the road. So find a cinder path in the park and go running there. So sometimes just something as simple as don't run alongside the road, go to the park and there's going to be a running trail that has either cinder or wood chips or whatever they use, bark mulch or something. So that's going to be a lot healthier than running alongside the highway and hyperventilating car exhaust. But then we have the internet, folks. You can say, go onto the internet, you can type in relaxation techniques. So they get that guided imagery where you go from head to toe and you tense and relax the muscles until you go through the whole body and then you end up being really relaxed. There's also the idea of a safe place, which is imagining a place in the world. It can be a real place or an imaginary place that you feel safe. And one of my favorite places in the world is just north of Cannon Beach on the Oregon coast. I don't know what it is about that place. There's a Cola Park, and you drive down this long, winding road through the forest to get down to this beach, and there's rocks, and the waves are crashing up over those rocks, and you can get down to this little cove where there's a bit of sandy beach. The first time I went there, I felt this rush of spiritual energy of some sort. It was like my spirit lived there waiting for me to arrive physically. That's almost what it felt like. It was such a magical place for me that I've gone back there a couple times because it just seems like such a sacred place in the world. So if I need to imagine a safe place or a magical place when I'm stressed out, I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to think about that beach at Ecola State Park. It's a beautiful, magical place for me. For me, being in any forest is like walking through a cathedral. You know, the forest is a beautiful place to be. At nighttime, daytime, I'm as uncomfortable in the forest at night as I am in the daytime. And I have good night vision. I've literally run through the forest at night and I don't trip over things. I can see where I'm going somehow. Maybe it's intuition, maybe it's night vision, I don't know what it is, but it's a place where I feel very comfortable. Also being by the seacoast. And being by water, any kind of water, is actually kind of invigorating because we do get energy from water. I mean, we're, 90% water anyway? I don't know. We're made out of water. So being around water is energizing. But I particularly like being by the ocean because you got that rhythm of the tides coming in and out. I find it very soothing. Even if it's a really stormy place where the waves are crashing over the rocks, that energy to me is also quite powerful. So it's really about finding the places in the world where you feel safe, where you feel comfortable. A lot of people don't like being in the concrete jungle of a big city. So being in a big city for them is stressful. So even if you live in a city, you try to find some place within the city that gives you some kind of reprieve from all that concrete and noise. I lived in Montreal, and I would sometimes go up to Mount Royal, and I found this place near the top of the mountain that had a little bit of a dip. And I would sit in there, and I would not see anything but trees. And I couldn't hear anything. All I could hear was the breeze and the trees. You know, and it was like being out in the country. And it was right in the middle of Montreal. And it was great. So, I mean, I had a pretty good lifestyle there, so I wasn't stressed out much. But it was really, still, it was very restful for me and energizing to go up to Mount Royal and find this nice little quiet, calm place where I could just sit for a while and soak in the energy of nature. So that's part of self-care, is being aware of what kind of environment you feel safe and comfortable in, what kind of environment gives you energy. And being able to, and then when you're not able to visit that place, you can picture it in your head, and that can sometimes help you relax and find your center again. So that self-care can be quite complex. Like I say, going online, getting some relaxation techniques, the alkaline versus acid diet chart, you can find that online. If you don't know about different foods and the effects that different dietary choices can have on you, pros and cons of honey over sugar, or decaffeinated coffee over caffeinated coffee. Is it still beneficial? For some people, it's the caffeine flavor. They can drink decaf coffee, and it still has an energizing effect because maybe they're used to drinking caffeinated coffee, but the flavor alone, the association is powerful enough to give you a little bit of a kick, even though it's not caffeinated. So there's a lot you can learn online about nutrition, about health. Do the research. Find out what you need to know. Yeah.
So you have victim services at your facility. And tying into self-care, like, do you have to teach, as part of your services, do you have to teach them how to reach out to services and like how to ask for what they want?
Yeah, I mean, our victim services workers, when they do that initial intake, they will hear from what the clients are sharing that they need something that we don't offer, whether it be emergency housing or health care or dental care or whatever.
The basic needs have to be taken care of.
Yeah, so they will give them the references, and if the client really doesn't feel like they're up to following through, they'll say, well, I'll make the initial call, I'll make the inquiry while you're here in the office with me, and if you can put it on speakerphone, all the better, because you can ask the question. And then typically, if you do that, the clients will engage in that conversation as well. At first, you're the one that makes the phone call, and I've got a client who's interested in finding out what your services are. You know, how do they get in? What's the criteria? And then they will start asking questions you may not know the answer to. The client will pipe up and say, oh, well, actually, this is a part of the city I'm living in, but I'm going to be evicted at the end of the month because the building's coming down or whatever. So they will very often engage in that conversation if you break the ice with them. And once you've done that, then they are better about going off and doing it on their own, especially when they find that when the effort to reach out works in their favor, then they feel a little bit more hopeful about reaching out and accessing services on their own.
And do you find that the majority of your clients do require some of those victim services?
I would say a significant number. I mean, like I said, we have our victim services workers doing the initial intake just to sort of speed up the access to the agency. And so the client has the feeling that they're actually moving forward in some capacity. And during that, they identify all these other needs. But a lot of times clients don't really need a lot of victim services support. But it might come up later. They might be in therapy with me for 2 or 3 months, and then it finds out we never really realized that they were in foster care, because they talk about mom and dad, and we kind of assume that it was a natural mom and dad. But 2 months down the road, they somehow come up with we inform us that it was a foster care situation. We say, oh, well, then you would probably qualify for the residential historical abuse program. So if you'd like, I can talk to Chris or Sherry and set up a time for you coming in to see them and talk about that, because you can apply and it's really easy to get. You don't have to do a police report. And so sometimes therapists will identify things that the victim services workers didn't catch. And then we refer them back to victim services to help facilitate that external connection to other services.
I'm really curious about work and like lack of productivity and these kind of issues. Like, I have a lot of boundaries at work, but how often do you think that these issues that you brought up, like not just sexual but domestic abuse, affect like there's, you mentioned that not being able to keep a job is a common. What happens to all these men that can't keep a job? Like most of them wouldn't have services like what you have at your location. So.
Right. Well, if they can't hold down a job, there's all the issues of trust, the difficulty with authority, etc.
And like 90% of our homeless are men.
Right. Well, in Vancouver, the last homeless count, 79% of the homeless were men, and a significant number of those were First Nations, of course. But what happens to them? Well, in our agency, they can come in and pay as little as $5, and we'll have a couple clients who clearly can probably barely even afford bus fare to get to the office, and we will waive fees entirely. We try to keep a cap on that, because if we're too generous, we won't be here a year from now.
Victim services to help them?
Well, victim services, but they can't really do therapy.
No, but
They can help them with some of the practical issues.
Yeah.
They can get them into emergency housing. They can help them apply for compensation. We've helped some clients apply for disability because they didn't know they would qualify. They'd applied for welfare, but if they apply for disability instead, because they actually qualify, they get a little bit of extra money. It's only maybe a couple $100s a month, but that little extra makes a difference. So the victim services workers can help them access a better source of income. We can actually fast track a person applying to BC Medical. And sometimes our clients really do need medical care. They're not taking good care of themselves, and we can tell that their health is suffering. And we can fast track their application to BC Medical so they can get free or at least affordable health care, whether it be dentistry or whatever. We've also, on a couple of occasions, we would actually take the client to the hospital. A little over a year ago, one of my therapists, or one of my interns actually, was working with a client who described some sensations. He was feeling kind of, his extremities were kind of tingly and numb. It sounded like he was having a heart attack. And so she said, it really sounds to me like you need to go to a hospital and find out what's going on. He said, no, it's okay. I'll go after the session. And she said, I'm calling the ambulance right now. So she did. She called the ambulance, took him downstairs, waited out on the sidewalk with him until the ambulance came and picked him up. He was having a heart attack. And if she hadn't caught that and facilitated him getting to the hospital, he might have died. Another time, a client was in our office, and at that time, we were 2 blocks from St. Paul's Hospital. And I don't remember, this was quite a few years ago, so I don't remember exactly what was going on, but the client was clearly having some kind of a health crisis. So the therapist walked him down to the emergency ward and got him into the hospital. So yeah, we'll do that kind of thing. We're not just about doing therapy, we work with the whole person, and we try to, if we can't provide a solution to whatever their need is, then we try to connect them with whoever can. And in Vancouver there are lots of options, and in smaller communities there aren't the options. So it's a much more challenging situation when you've got clients that need something that's not available in your community.
And I find that the services for women are much more comprehensive, like what you're talking about here. If I wanted to go to a women's shelter across Canada, they would take care of all the complex needs in one location, and I would get all my needs met, but I just find for men that's not the case.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, in Vancouver, you can pretty well find what men need, but it's here, and then it's 12 miles on the other side of town, and then it's 5 miles north, and then it's, so you have to run around, for some guys, they have to run around all over the city to get all their needs met. And that's one of the things that we hope to reduce by having our emergency shelter. We're going to have a crisis shelter for men that need it, whether it's going to be relatively short term, while we get them out of danger if they're highly risk for suicide, or if they're homeless due to a separation or divorce or bad relationship breakup, then we're going to try to help them find housing, whether subsidized housing or emergency housing or whatever it is that they need. Yeah, I mean, I think that we really try to be mindful of everything that we hear presented. And if we can't solve the problem, we try to find someone who can. In the meantime, really helping clients, part of one of your other questions, we try to really help clients be more assertive about articulating their needs and doing the search to find out what's available, and then having the confidence to ask. And sometimes asking is so difficult for them. How dare you ask me for that? You know, that's so often the response they got growing up. No, you can't. Just, you know, get out of my face, I'm busy. You know, that kind of attitude. So a lot of clients don't even know how to ask. So helping them understand that, and maybe role-playing is helpful as well. I can't believe that I was so comprehensive that there are no lingering questions. I don't think I've covered everything that's possible.
Well, actually, I do have a question.
Yeah.
And this is based around like separated fathers who had been separated from the family and leaving their families at home. Now, when you talk about self-care, my issue is a lot of these men are trapped in an alimony, okay, child support, often working 2 jobs, and then the lack of self-care comes in, right? They're not eating right, they're pumping up as much money as possible to base enforcement programs, alimony, they're expected to pay all this money, right? So a lot of guys dive right into their work or second jobs, and then their health declines. I've seen it in my own family members, you know what I mean? They don't eat, they don't sleep, like you said, and those simple vitals are very important. But how do you help those those men in those situations when they're tied in and they have no extra time for themselves because they're trying to hold on to the little bit they have left with their family or their children, but then still balancing it out with the pressures of family law.
Right.
So I understand that, like, that's something that everyone needs to be coached in if you don't know how to do it. Like,
Right.
my own personal brother, he has horrible eating style, you know what I mean? He doesn't sleep. If one little thing stresses him out, he won't eat for a week, you know what I mean?
Wow.
And then I tried to teach him, I was like, if you don't take care of yourself, then how are you gonna take care of your family? Like, and I wasn't trying to be critical to him. Like,
Right.
he
No, of course
got
not.
really offensive when I said that to him, but I was like, that's not the point. The point is that I realized that she's demeaned you in every form, okay? And now she's affecting your physical.
Yeah.
So how do you help men get past that hurdle? You know what I mean? Because
Right.
he doesn't want to look weak in front of his boys,
Right.
right? So he's trying to be the father, trying to be the man. But on the sidelines, he's a baby. He's
Yeah.
crying, depressed, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right into the bottle, you know what I mean? So on the sidelines, he appears to be good for his children. But in the backlight, he's diminishing slowly, you know? He's 43 years old and he already looks 52, 60
Wow.
years old, you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
So how do you deal with men in that situation when they don't have the time or the financial means to take care of
Yeah.
themselves?
There have been many occasions when I've been interviewed on TV or radio, and one of the things I say to address that whole idea about hypermasculinity, I'll say it takes a lot more courage to come in and face your own trauma and deal with your baggage than it does to hide behind an addiction. The really brave, courageous men are the ones that reach out and get the help they need. And do you repair your own car? Do you create the fabrics that, or do you make your own clothes? Do you have a rubber tree in the backyard? Do you extract rubber and create your own tires? No, you rely on a lot of experts to provide the needs. You go to a mechanic, you go to a plumber to fix your pipes that are screwed up, you go to an electrician to rewire your house because you're trying to install something. The roof needs repair, you hire a roofing company. So when something is amiss within the self, it's your responsibility as a caring, responsible adult to go out and get the expertise that you need to repair that faulty mechanism. And if the faulty mechanism is your emotional life, you need to go to the emotional mechanic, your therapist. And it takes a lot more courage and commitment to your responsibility to go and deal with those things. I don't like to be too critical or it sound like I'm slamming people. But the truly cowardly people are downtown east side with a needle in their arm.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the truth of it. I mean, I don't want to really sound like I'm overly judgmental of them. I'm just observing the reality. These people are so frightened by their trauma that the only way that they can cope with it is to be stoned. And that is not brave. It doesn't take courage to get drunk. It doesn't take courage to get stoned. It doesn't take courage to spend all day looking at pornography on the internet. It takes courage to face these issues and do the hard work that men are built to do by getting out there and addressing your trauma and getting it resolved so that you can be the responsible husband and father that your family needs you to be. And so you play on that masculine conditioning, and you say, if you really want to be a strong, resilient, resourceful, dependable man, you face your trauma and you buck up and you get out there and you deal with it. You find a therapist and you work it through. Okay. Huh?
No, I just said powerful,
Yeah,
Well
okay.
said.
Yeah.
I think one thing that men have in their favor is their ability to be accountable. And I'm not sure if that's like a social conditioning or whatever, but I find that that's something that lacks, can be lacking in women. Women will, I guess I would generalize it, are more likely to play passive victim, I guess, and kind of get stuck into that. But I think that we certainly reinforce that with our. So what do you have anything to say about men's ability to be more accountable? Do you think that that's like a?
Well, I think what you're really kind of speaking to is the part of our genderized social norms. The idea is that women are submissive, men are dominant. I mean, we know that's not really true, but that's been the chatter over generations. That men are the strong ones of the members of the species, and we're the ones that can be depended on. It's our responsibility to protect our family and protect our wives or protect our children and bring home dinner and all that kind of stuff.
Testosterone does have an impact on men's behavior, though.
Yes.
Has an impact on.
But you can only really talk in generalizations. That's the conditioning. But there are men who are not accountable, and there are women who are. So there are these socialized gender norms that people fall back on when they don't have the courage or the confidence to move forward and to be more healthy, well-balanced, and responsible. And again, socialized gender norms allow people. A woman can play the submissive card if she doesn't really feel like working. Oh, I need to be taken care of. There are people that play on that. They're quite capable, but they'd rather not bother. They'd rather stay home, watch soap operas, and be taken care of. And there are guys that they will be accountable things that's not really their responsibility. Some men are overly responsible. They take on the weight of the world to their own detriment. So it's about finding that balance. Self-care is a starting point. I have to take care of the self so that you're healthy enough to take care of the things that are your responsibilities. But when you take on somebody else's responsibility, when they are quite capable of doing it for themselves, you're undermining their ability. I had a sister-in-law, my girlfriend and I were living with her sister and boyfriend at the time, and the sister-in-law, I'm going to call her my sister-in-law because even though we weren't legally married, she was for all intents and purposes. She was a heroin addict. And she came into my room one day and she was moaning about, oh, I don't feel very good. I feel kind of blah, blah, blah. And of course she wanted me to help take care of her 2-year-old, which I didn't mind doing. He was a great kid. And I said to her, Doria, if you don't like the way your life is, if you don't like how you feel, do something about it. I can't change your life. I care about you, but I can't make your life better. That's your responsibility. Get off your ass and do something. She said, you're absolutely right. And so for a while, she was a bit more responsible. But if I said, oh, don't worry, Doria, I'll take care of Donovan, and I'll call your doctor, and I'll do this for you, she would just sit back and be irresponsible. But because I said, this is your duty. You take care of yourself. You don't like the way your life is, do something about changing it. And she did. And she's completely clean and sober, has been for a couple decades now. Her son has grown up and is a pretty cool kid. I met him recently, having not seen him since he was about 2.5 or 3 years old. But if I pandered to her laziness, she wouldn't have gotten any better. So I think that...
It's like a form of disabling and enabling.
Yeah, really. You don't want to enable people's laziness or self-pity. If you're the entertainment at the pity party, it's going to keep on going. So you don't want to facilitate and enable people's dysfunctional behavior patterns. I mean, sometimes people need support. They maybe not know how to do something, or they don't know where to reach out. So you might kind of have to help them out a little bit. It's like you act as a catalyst, not as the one who takes it all on. People that care about being a parent, that they love their kids, well, don't you want to be a good example? Don't you want to help your children learn how to be more functional adults? Modeling is a really important part of that process. You can't sit around on welfare and expect your child to grow up to be this really successful businessman or high-end professional, because what have they had to learn from? Dad sitting in front of the TV, drinking beer and collecting his welfare check. And mom likewise. So I think that really kind of emphasizing you want to be a good father, you want to be a good husband, you want to be a responsible member of the family unit. Take some responsibility. If that means getting your baggage out of the way so you can function, then that's part of your responsibility. And again, the idea that the really courageous men are the ones that take this on and do the work that they need to do to be better.
In the situation where you said like it was like the crabs in the bowl, what do you suggest in that case when you have other crabs pulling you down? Like, what do you do with your clients then? Do they have to get rid of their family?
Sometimes. And that's unfortunate, but sometimes if your family is so toxic and unhealthy that the only way that you can get your act together is to distance yourself from them, that's what you have to do. And then what you do is you create a family of your own, of healthy friends and people that really fit well for you. I had a friend that we were kind of more of a brother to each other than we were to our respective brothers, because my brother and I don't really have much alike. Well, we get along well enough, but we're just very different. And his brothers are, one of them is really quite out of it. The other one is just kind of a recluse, a bit of a hermit. So he and I had the kind of brotherly relationship that we both needed from our own siblings and didn't get. And so, in a way, he was a kind of a brother to me in some ways. Now, he's moved way up on some corner of Vancouver Island, and I haven't seen him for a couple of years. But while we were living in the same city, we just had this great sort of brotherhood kind of relationship going on. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes you do have to distance yourself from your family, but sometimes it's just a question of asserting clear boundaries with your family. No, I'm not going to come over and take care of your kids. You need to stay home. All this partying nightlife that you're getting into, you're not 20 years old anymore. You need to settle down and take responsibility. I'm not going to keep rescuing you every time, you need me to take care of your kids. Sometimes that's what they need. They need a good shake-up. And then if they have a lot of baggage in the way, then just say, I know that you've been traumatized, so was I, but I went and got help, and that's why my life is working. You need to go and get some help so you can get your life working. And you're quite capable, I know you are, but you've got all this baggage on your shoulders that you've got to get rid of. So sometimes you give somebody, just a bit of a hard wake-up call. And not that this always works, but if you can heal some of the unhealth in your family, then that's better. When I work with couples or I work with people around family issues, I'll say, if there's a basis of love, if you love each other, it's worth the effort. If all the parties involved, whether it's just you and the partner or you and the siblings or the parents or whomever, if you love each other and there's a desire for things to get better, then it's worth the effort. But sometimes love is not enough. You can love somebody tremendously, but realize that there's no way that staying together is healthy. And I actually had, I think I mentioned the couple that broke up. They came back to, we had worked together for a number of sessions. I don't remember how long, but for a while. They came in and they said one day, we've decided to break up because we cannot get our acts together. We love each other too much to stay together because we're not good for each other. So the breaking up was an act of love. And that's okay, because I helped facilitate that separation so that they could leave on a good note, with still positive feelings towards each other, instead of being bitter and hurt and all this kind of stuff. It was painful to break up a relationship where they really loved each other, but I really validated the act of love that was all about. And that, I didn't say it, but the fact is that maybe some years down the road when they both get really healthy, they might be able to reconnect. I had a client that did that. He was so messed up from his trauma that he very rarely left the house. His psychiatrist had him on antidepressants and anti-anxieties and, a whole bunch of stuff. He was so full of chemicals that he just couldn't function. He would sleep during the day because he didn't feel safe at night. And if he ever went anywhere, it was his wife who would be facilitating that wherever they went, to the shopping mall or out to dinner or whatever. And it was almost like he was psychologically, emotionally hiding behind his wife if he ever left the house. And he decided at one point, because he was in group therapy, he was certainly making some progress, he decided they didn't want to be on medication anymore because he really felt it was curtailing his life. So he went to his psychiatrist and said, I don't want to be on this medication anymore. I want you to taper me off. And the psychiatrist, I don't think that's a good idea. I think that you need to stay on the medication. He said, I don't want to, and I'm not going to. You're either going to help me taper off or I'm going to taper off on my own. And you know that that's not a great idea. So the psychiatrist gave in, helped taper him off. He knew that he had agoraphobia, where afraid to go out into the world. So he drove to the shopping mall, sat in his car for about 10 minutes, monitored what he was feeling, went back home. A day or so later, he drove back to the shopping mall, got out of his car, sat on a bench outside the mall, sat there for about 10 minutes, paid attention, sort of did the scan, what's going on psychologically, physically, emotionally, got back in his car and went home. Went back to the mall again, went inside the front door of the mall, sat on a bench just inside the door, sat there for a while, took all that in, went home. Came back to the mall again. This time he had a goal, buy a pair of socks. So he went in and he bought a pair of socks and went home. All the time he's paying attention and monitoring what's going on with him. And he went out grocery shopping one day. His wife used to do all the grocery shopping. He said it took him about 2 hours to stay focused and remember what he was there for. But eventually he got everything that he wanted to get, and he went back home. Well, a little while further on down the road, he decided to go to Germany and visit some cousins. So he flew from Vancouver, changed planes in Toronto, flew on to Germany. He had a cousin that met him at the airport, but during the day when the cousin was working, he would take day trips. This was a guy that was afraid to leave his home. And the medication was helping him stay hidden in his home. So with that progressive desensitization about being in public and reducing the medication, finally he gained ownership of himself. Well, he realized at one point that the person that he was really in love with, he let slip by. And the marriage was comfortable, but it wasn't really based on a real deep love. And so he moved to South America to be with the original love of his life. And this was a guy that was had no control over his life, medicated, sitting in his house, afraid to do anything. And so I think that this is an example of a man that really took the bull by the horns, if you will, addressed the issues, faced his fear, got the chemicals out of his system, took ownership of himself, and found the life that he had been denied through fear and unresolved trauma issues. So I think that was really a good example of someone having the courage to really take their life back. And it's really heartwarming to see people that have that kind of success. Yeah. Yeah, let's take a break, and then we can decide whether there's anything that hasn't been adequately covered.
We could finish the seminar here if we're finished with speaking on everything. It's been a long weekend, so.
Mm-hmm.